Can you hear me? You can't hear me. Not anymore. Right. Can you hear me now? Good. No. Is that a no?
It's better.
Huh, that's weird. I can hear that. How's this? Better? Good. See if it stays that way. So I think we'll get started. We're a couple minutes after 3. I'm Bob Hinden. I chair the IAOC. We, sort of as a result of thinking about the comments at the mic at the last, in the open mic session at the last IETF meeting, sort of thought about what we could do to better inform the community about the IOC, because it seemed based on some of the questions there wasn't, the knowledge was not as clear as it should be or could be. And so we wanted to try something different, which is this session where we can go over, I can go over a lot more content about what the IOC does than can be possibly done at the plenary, especially given the community desire to reduce the length of the status talks. So, and I think if this seems to be positive at the end, I think we'll probably repeat this periodically. I think it could be every meeting, but maybe once a year or something. We have a requirement to sort of do annual reporting, so this could well be it. So the agenda is sort of just to first establish how the IOC was created, talk about the operations of the IOC, how we do things, the financial model, how we do venue selection, and then get questions and feedback at the end. So if you have specific questions, we have mics and you can come up. I'd like to get finished in the hour. And also note that this is not about the IETF trust. That's separate. I wanted to focus this on the IOC today and not get into the relationship with the trust. And just there's a lot of, this is a very acronym-rich environment, so I got some requests that it would be good to define them. Hopefully most of you will know these, but for reference. And so also this presentation is being recorded, and the slides are available online. And so there's also some material in here which is, maybe intended a little bit more for reference. And a lot of, or most of the material or the information about the IOC is on the web. This is a picture of the website. It might even be readable, but so where all the financial reports, where all the public information is on this site. We're also in the midst in a project to sort of redo the format of the website to try to organize it better and make the content more consistent. But this is the current version of that. Okay. Is this better? Oh, much better. Okay, I'll do this. Should get one of those things you wear. This is probably also going to make it colder in here. So the IOC was set up as part of the overall IASA, or IETF administrative oversight or support activity defined in BCP 101. It was established in 2005 This was, the history of this is it was part of the shift away from when CNRI was running the IETF sort of operation side. The IETF wanted to sort of have more control over what it was doing, and the result of a long discussion was what is now BCP 101. And it started with the original goal of managing the operations and finance. And the other thing I like to sort of say and keep in mind is the IOC does not set policy for the standards process. It's there to sort of implement, and I'll go into this more, it's there to implement the needs of the standards process, but at the same time, the IOC has responsibility to make sure that the money is spent responsibly. So it's not, we don't just write checks, so to speak, but there's always consideration for how much things cost and whether that's a reasonable expense. But most things are fairly separate. There are times when there are issues that sort of meet or have overlap. And the way we deal with that is to sort of talk to the ISG or the IAB, whoever the relevant organization is. Is my water just a here? Is that my water or yours?
I think it's mine. Do you want small?
Yes. Thank you. And so these are the members of the IOC, and we have, well, actually one of the ones who are in the room, I think Scott, Dave, Chris, Oli are here. And there's a conflicting meeting with that affects the IETF chair and the IAB chair, and so a number of people who would be here can't because of that. I can't speak for the rest. Thank you. And you'll note on here that, as you can see, different people are appointed or become members of the IOC based on either roles or how they're selected. We have people who are selected by the NOMCOM, the IAB, the ISG, the ISOC Board of Trustees, and we have people who are in ex officio roles. Everyone except for the IAD, Ray Pelletier, is a voting member. So whether you're appointed by the NOMCOM or have an ex officio role, everyone is a voting member. And I actually think that this mix of people and, mix of way people get on the IOC, and that we have the chairs of the ISG or the IETF and the IAB and the ISOC CEO and president actually I think it helps with the decision-making process quite a lot, because you have people who have a stake in the outcome. If they have concerns, it's important that they be listened to. And so I think that the way the IOC is formed actually is working very well. And there's been discussion about changing it, but in my experience in doing this, is this mixture of members is actually pretty effective. So this is the structure, and the reason really why this is here is to say that there's the main IOC, which is where decisions are made, but there's a number of subcommittees who work at a more detailed level on particular topics. We have meetings, budget, tools management, RFP and bids, and legal. These are standing committees. Like the meetings committee reviews different venues and makes a recommendation to the IOC. The IOC will then vote on accepting that recommendation. So it's the full IOC is not going into detail on all issues. We also create subcommittees for a particular topic, but they're not standing. They will work on a particular issue, and then disband. We have one now that's dealing with the way the IETF servers are hosted, and I think this may evolve into a standing IT subcommittee, but right now it's focused on improving the way the IETF servers are currently hosted, and in that sense will probably end. And we've had other things in the past and will in the future. So the IOC has a number of responsibilities. First is the finances and budget. We have oversight over the administrative director. We do his performance review. We recommend to ISOC, raises and bonuses and so forth. We support what I call supporting the needs of the standards process, the ISG, the IAB, the IRTF, and the RFC editor. We select and provide oversight for contracted services, and I note that because it's been a, hot topic, is that for the RFC editor-related contracts, we do this in working with the RFC series editor. So it's there are both have responsibilities here. The IOC is responsible for venue selection and sort of the operational side of the meetings. This work is done largely by the Secretariat, but we hold the contract with the Secretariat. And also the last one is support for the IETF's IT services, the data tracker, the websites, tools development, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the portfolio, so to speak, of responsibilities. The point of this slide is that the IASA has basically two, employees or contractors who are really providing direct support. There's the IAD, and then there's the RFC series editor. Everything else is done by contracted services. Those are the only people we have direct relationships with. And so the Secretariat, meeting network services, the RFC Production Center, the publisher, RFC Publisher, we have a contract for legal services, and then we tend to have short-term contracts for individual projects. These are all contracted services. The IETF or the IASA does not have a large staff of people working directly for it. Everything else is, of course, volunteers. And, this is different than many of the other internet ecosystem organizations like the registries and ICANN, who have large staffs. We do this differently. Of course, much of the content is done in the IETF by volunteers, and I personally think it should stay that way. So I think this is a good way to operate this, as opposed to having lots of full-time people whose job it is to do this. Decision making and consensus in the IOC. Most decisions are unanimous. We always, in addition to this, we always do votes on financial decisions and what we think are important, where there's a roll call and everyone votes. Occasionally, everyone does not agree, and we will do things by majority. This has happened maybe 3 or 4 times since I've been on the IOC, so it doesn't happen often. Most of the time, everyone agrees, but occasionally not. But we do need to make decisions. This is an operational group, and you can't stop things because there's a deadlock. And all decisions and votes are recorded in the minutes. We sometimes do e-votes, and the results of that e-vote will be recorded in the minutes. Transparency and community feedback. We try to be as transparent as possible. Most information we have, we publish on the website. We send email to the community. But there is some data that is not shared. There's personnel-related, financial negotiations, RFP responses, and things like that are kept confidential. And if you read our minutes, you'll notice that sometimes it'll say, negotiate a contract for some amount, but it'll say confidential. So we have there's behind the scenes, there's a version with more information for our records, but what's public, we take out the information that we don't think is reasonable to disclose. The IOC seeks input from the community where we think it's important to get feedback. We regularly do this for statements of work, or we send RFIs out. We will, if we're thinking about a new meeting in a new region, we'll ask for feedback. There's somewhat recent examples. There was an issue with the Beijing meeting with things about the hotel and requirements on attendees. We brought this to the community and got the information of the community, which helped us sort of negotiate that provision with the hotel. I think that was a very successful process, and so I think we will continue to do things like that. And the IOC also works with the ISG, with the IAB, with the RFC editor, when policy and implementation roles overlap. And some things are very clear and very separate. Some things have, decisions may have financial impact, and if it's not something that can be accommodated in the budget, or we think it's unwise, then there's a discussion. It's not we try to have a very useful working relationship with the other groups. This is another reason why I think it's good to have the chairs of the other groups as members, as voting members of the IOC. It tends to pull all that together, and it tends to avoid having the different groups going off in different directions, creating conflict. And you'll see emails sent to the community that, for instance, there was recently one on remote participation, and that was sort of sent by both the IETF chair and myself. And so that's, I think, and remote participation is one of the areas where there's overlap. It's like, what services do we want? What's the right thing for an IETF meeting? But the same, how do we implement them? What's feasible to implement? And that's an area where working together works better than just trying to do things independently. So, finances, everyone's favorite topic. So, sort of two introductory slides before we get to see numbers. So the IETF is not formally, legally, in some sense it doesn't exist. It's not a corporation, it's not an LLC, it's not registered anywhere, we just do what we do. This certainly causes confusion with other standards groups from time to time, whether I still heard that I think the European Union does not recognize the standards that the IETF produces. It's like, even though you can't ignore the internet, but officially they can't reference them or something. So it's, there's a lot of history here. But we're not a formal legal organization. We're not part of the UN, et cetera, et cetera. We're officially an organized activity of the Internet Society, and this means that all the money flows through ISOC. We don't have our own bank accounts. We don't have our own receivables or debts or obligations. So it's not, when you look at the financial statements, it's a little different than what you would see from a business or some sort of for or nonprofit entity, because we're not, we don't get the, if we do better than budget, it's not like we get to keep the money and put it in the bank account. So it's, we create a budget, we manage to it because it's an important part of ISOC's budget. It's a, the numbers are certainly non-trivial. And it's good that we do what we say, because this means ISOC treats us with a lot of independence. So in some sense, I was trying to think of a way to describe this, and I think it's more like a department or profit center inside of a company, where it's not the whole company. It's like you don't get to keep, if you make money, you don't get to keep it, but it also means if you lose money, you don't have to go into debt. So it's, you're part of a larger structure. So in essence, our bottom line for the year is always zero. It's like we have, well, you'll see the next slide. We have revenue that we attribute to the IETF, and we have expenses, and then there's, it would be a big negative number, but then ISOC makes a contribution that sort of makes it zero. So I think it's a very nice arrangement, actually. And the IETF budget is incorporated into ISOC's overall budget, and then is approved when ISOC approves the overall budget. The ISOC Board of Trustees does not approve the IETF's budget as a separate line item. It's just always incorporated in and then approved as part of the overall ISOC budget. So as I was saying, the meeting fees and sponsorships always pay for the meeting cost itself, and then they also pay for part of the IETF's operations. So the meetings have a surplus, essentially, and we use the surplus to pay for the things that happen all the time, the website, secretariat support, data tracker, internet drafts. All of those things are paid for by the surplus and by the ISOC contribution. ISOC also provides support for helping finding meeting hosts, sponsors, bits and bytes table sponsors, administrative support. We have someone from ISOC who's doing the minutes for the IOC meetings. We have accounting support regarding the budget. We work closely with ISOC's finance department. And I think I have several hats here to wear. I'm both the IOC chair, and I'm also, the IAB appointed member, or one of the IAB's appointed members to the ISOC board. So I sort of see this from both sides. And I think this is a real win-win situation. I think it's good for the IETF. We work in a financial structure where where we have continued support. We're not having to always be adjusting up and down based on, individual fundraising events. And it's also good for ISOC to have the relationship with the IETF. And it works well in that the IETF is not given direction by ISOC on what to do. It's, really they're in a supporting role, and it's very good. And this helps ISOC with a larger framework of supporting open standards. So I think this is a very good relationship. We should be thankful to them, and I think ISOC gets a lot of benefit from having the IETF as one of the pillars of ISOC. So this is my very, very high-level view of the finances. It's intending to show the direction of flow of money. We have direct revenue for registration fees, sponsorships, things like bits and bytes. The ice creams. There's usually ice cream on Thursdays if they can find a sponsor. Sometimes the welcome reception. All of those are sort of, we show as revenue. And then we have expenses. We have the actual meeting costs, the rooms, the food, the putting the power strips in, all of these tables, everything a venue charges for. And we also have the continuing operations, the website, all of the other things, the RFC editor, the other things that make the whole process work. And then ISOC, which is sort of support as a supporting organization, where our support comes from, contributes money that makes the whole thing, gives us a zero balance, so it covers the whole thing. So this is the, where the money goes and where it comes in from. So the next section is actual financial data, starting with the 2012 results, for last year, and then talk about the budget for this year and sort of projections forward and some history. I won't go into the detailed spreadsheets in any detail. We can come back to them if there are questions. Part of this is just because I wanted, I knew these slides are going to be available online, and it was a good way to include the information. So the overall results for last year, we were higher on revenue than budget by over, 308,000. We had good attendance, sponsorship. We had bits and bytes. We had lower expenses than budget by, 220,000. We had some lower meeting costs, and we had budgeted for some transition expenses that turned out not to happen because we did a new contract with the current contractors. Tools development was over budget by about 40K, and the result was the amount requested from ISOC was below budget by about 490,000. So it was a budget-wise very good year. This is the eye chart, so we can have that for reference, or you should be able to find it online. This is sort of the overall picture from last year, this year's budget, and next 2 years, which are advice to ISOC. The ISOC board asked us to provide, when we do a new budget, is to provide sort of an outlook for the next 2 years, or the 2 years following, so that they can do planning. And so we're about, well, you can see the numbers, but for this year we're expecting revenue of over $3 million. We have expenses of a little over $5 million, and then an ISOC contribution of about $2 million. So we're about a $5.25 million operation, and ISOC pays, what is that, about close to half, about 45% of that. This is sort of another more detailed view. It has more breakdown of what the individual costs are. If someone has specific questions on that, you can do that now or later. But and this is sort of the level of budget that the IOC sees when it approves it. But it breaks it down into pieces, the more defined pieces. And then this as well shows the, last year, this year, and the next 2 years. So I've started doing these slides for a couple of years, and it's to show the trend. And yeah, it certainly looks like it's going up, I think, is my conclusion. We tend to be very conservative about the out years, and I think we've showed it was going up more than it actually has. We've also, there's some other sponsorships that are in the works that may actually cause this to not grow as much, because I think we'll have a better idea of what the revenue will be, what the hosting and sponsorship is. But this is the current trend. You can look at the ISOC contribution on the bottom. We're around a little below 2 million, but it looks like it's growing to about 220 or 2.2 million. It's not we're not seeing $1 million changes. We're seeing, over this it's like a couple $100,000. So it's not a giant amount of, percentage-wise, it's not that big. But, it is something to watch anyway. At the moment, ISOC has good sources of overall revenue. If that was to change, then we would be having some different discussions. But that said, I think ISOC is very committed to supporting the IETF. I think it's essential for ISOC to have the relationship with the IETF it does. And so I don't think we would see too much pushback, but we would certainly want to be more maybe well, I don't know. I think we're doing the right thing. I don't think we're being extravagant with the money. I think we do it very responsibly. As I said, we don't have a big full-time staff. It's easier to make adjustments with contractors and service contracts. So I'm not too worried about this, but it is something to sort of watch. The next one is sort of the same trend, but it's the breakout of where the expenses are. And you can see there's sort of growth in a couple areas, but there's not like one big area that sort of jumped up. It's all very incremental. Some of it is just hotel costs, venue costs seem to be going up a bit, but there's not I don't think one thing that is jumping out at me that where we're seeing things going out of control. So this is the end of the financial section, and we'll get to venues. No one is jumping up to the mic yet. Maybe the next section. I'm sure. So, given the debate on the list regarding Orlando, or discussion on the list, you'll see material in here because of that, trying to answer some of the questions. So the current venue selection process has been in place since November of 2010. It was, I would describe as a result of feedback from the Maastricht meeting, which was, November 2010 was Beijing, and we had some interesting experience at the previous meeting in Maastricht, and this resulted in several changes to the way the IAOC approached this. So one of the things was, and this was something that was, I think, developing, but moving from what was before that, I think like having several meetings in the U.S., a meeting in Europe, and occasionally in Asia, to a cycle where we try to have one meeting in North America, Europe, and Asia, sort of rotating, which is what we're doing now, and then with the possibility of an occasional meeting in another region. So this was sort of a big change to what was the plan of record at the time, and that we were going to have many fewer meetings in North America. There was a clear preference from the community for, what I call one roof facilities, where you can the rooms and the meeting facility is in the same, like here, essentially. Orlando has challenges, but it's not that one. Or walking from the hotel to the conference center, I think, is acceptable. But we try to do things like this, or like hotels where it's just in the same building. There's clear preference for that. We like city center locations where it's easy to get to restaurants, have alternate hotels. I think Orlando clearly fails in that regard. We like to have reasonable travel. We like to not have the same set of people always having to do a very expensive long trip. So that's mostly accomplished by rotating the venues to different continents. And then the other change we made was to have the venues under contract 3 years out. It was, I don't know if there was actually a schedule, but it was, they were done much later, and we found that we had much less choice in selection of venues, in finding the kind of venues we wanted. I think we're getting better costs. I'm not sure it's both cost and particularly hotel room costs by doing this, but it may, it's like the last 3 years were in the big recession, and that depressed a lot of hotel costs. the economy is getting better. I'm not sure in this case past performance is an indication of future performance, because if all the hotels raise their prices, we're not. It's not like we're a group who takes over all of Las Vegas. We get, I think, good relationships with hotels, but we're not as big as other groups who have much more buying power. But I think it's worked out very well. I think we're getting better terms. I think it's allowing us to do these other things in ways that were much harder if we were doing them much closer to when the meeting happened. So there's a timeline sort of to think about. About 4 years out, we select the regions, using this 1-1-1 star model. 3 years out, that's where most of the work happens. Cities are identified to look at venues. We do site visits. The city list is usually refined. We do site visits, the reports from the site visits. The meeting committee recommends venues, sort of reviews the results of this and makes a recommendation to the IOC. Usually it's for a particular venue. Sometimes it's saying, we think these two are good, they have these strengths and weaknesses, and then the IOC decides. The IOC approves that. The ID goes with the Secretariat and negotiates a contract, and then once we have it under contract, the city is announced. One thing a change that's in progress is that in the past we were we were announcing the city when there was a contract signed. You see plenary slides, with a particular city, usually a picture. But we were not announcing the actual hotel or venue hotel until right after the previous meeting. So we're trying, we've gotten some feedback that it would be helpful for some people to know the actual hotel earlier. We've done that for the meetings this year. We're going to see how that works out. There's some concern that this might make it harder for people to get rooms inside of the hotel block, because some people will book very early. They may then cancel at the last minute. But, it's got some, I think it's more positive than negative. So we'll see how it works, and if it seems to work well, we'll continue doing this. I'm not sure there's too much advantage in announcing a hotel more than about a year out, because at least based on my experience, you can't actually book rooms with hotels more than that. So it's sort of useful, but not as useful. And then 3 months out, and this is something that's more recent. So one of the side effects of doing contracts 3 years out is that you need to go back and you do a site visit before the contract, but as you get closer to the meeting, it's actually good to go back to the hotel, because 3 years is a long time regarding hotel staff. They could have remodeled. A whole bunch of stuff can happen. And so we've started as a regular thing doing site visits around 3 months out, plus or minus, to just review things, meet the current local staff, the local staff who will be there during our meeting, build relationships with them, see if there were any changes, sort of verify the networking plans are still feasible, just a bunch of stuff to make sure we don't show up Wednesday before and have a bunch of surprises. And so I think this is a side effect of, when you were just booking a year out, it wasn't such a big deal, but doing it 3 years out, I think is very necessary, and it seems to be working well.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Please.
On the previous slide, just curious, what happens between 4 years and 3 years out? That's what the slide makes it seem. I was just curious what the point was of picking the region a year before you're even thinking about the cities.
It's actually we've always done the region selection or announced it very early. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I mean, it's probably not that useful, actually.
I mean, I could see considering cities as part of the region. I was just curious. It seems odd, but
Well, so one thing, maybe Joe will say this too. One thing is, part of this is sort of looking for people who can host meetings, and so if they can see that we're going to meet in Asia, then there may be people who say, I might be interested in hosting. But Joel? Is it on?
So, yeah, I mean, I think there's the stated principle that the IAOC had that got discussed a lot on the mailing list, which was, how do we take the IETF meeting to where people are? And the ratio was designed to do that, but the ratio doesn't actually find hosts. And so you need time between the time you've announced what region it will be in and when you find a host is what my sense of that is. I mean, it doesn't always work that way. In my understanding of the ratio, several years ago, the meeting that we recently had in Atlanta would probably have been in Asia, or the previous one in Vancouver would have been, had there been a host in place at the right time in order to make that mechanic happen.
Right. I have a slide on that coming up.
The other thing I would observe is that the further out you plan the meeting, particularly because we've defined the dates, right? The dates go along with the regions, and the dates are currently defined out to 2017. That's an interesting piece of leverage with hotels because they know that we can't change our dates, or at least that we profess not to do them. Now, I've seen the IEEE, for example, move a meeting into conflict with us because we both define our dates very far out, and they simply moved one. So that does happen, but the dates actually do go along with the very early selection of regions and announcements.
Yeah, and the latter is a very good point, which I forgot to include on the slide. Part of the announcement of the region is we do select dates, and Ray goes through a process of looking at other groups, that people might be attending to see if we have any conflict. So we try to set the dates. I think it's actually more about the dates than the locations, far enough out so at least most people don't conflict with us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very small number of organizations that actually pick dates 5 years out, right. Because we don't know if Western civilization will exist in 5 years, so some things are certainly speculative. But those that do, we have conflict lists, and people do collide with us, and things are inconvenient, but that's not our fault because our dates are, out to 2017 now.
Right. It was annoying that the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, decided to meet on top of IETF last time.
Also, I just wanted to mention regarding your point about announcing the hotel much further out than previously, I really appreciate that. I like to plan far out. I like to get an idea of things, so I think it's great.
Okay, thank you. Pete.
Yeah, so we're planning dates 5 years out? Cities 4 years out, and then identify.
No, well, cities don't. I mean, we have
regions 4 years out, cities 3 years out.
Right, cities. Yeah, you need to have a city to find, with a hotel to do a contract. Yes.
And we would be able to do cheaper if we did it in reverse order. Well, not completely reverse order, but if we started choosing cities but didn't have the dates fixed, we would be able to get cheaper venues because they're using the fact that we've chosen the dates as a way to raise the price?
I don't think so. Because
I thought that's what Joel said, but
there's a lot of ways you can signal to hotels in negotiations. Certainly when dates have been very close. So, for example, the Dallas IETF in 2005 was, I believe, which is while this was being transferred from Vortex seminars to the IASA process, was, I believe, negotiated something like 6 months out. Certainly, if a hotel can't meet your needs or things are inflexible, having fixed dates means you don't get to use that as a negotiating position. Not that the hotel necessarily is going to prey on you because of it, but you certainly can't go. I mean, they're mindful of this. Obviously, when you're dealing with the region, the hotels in the region are all competing for your business.
So also, I'll add that. So what actually happens in the meeting committee is, okay, so we start talking about where would be good cities for some IETF meeting, and so we say, okay, how about this list of cities? Then AMS, they have a very good meeting planner. They go off and look at venues, see what venues there are in those cities. So they have to be available, and then we compare. We start comparing the results. So it's and the nice thing about 3 years out is it's you tend to sometimes get multiple qualified venues in different cities, and you have choice of cities. So it's I think we're not losing leverage for price based on this.
If you say cities identified to investigate, how many cities are usually identified as option?
Yeah, 5, probably plus or minus something. There's not an usually exact number.
I'm wondering if options are available, whether IAOC asks for community feedback, which options are better and less good.
Well, so we have done a survey a couple years ago where we asked people to sort of rank cities for meetings.
But what I mean is discussing concrete options.
Well, if we do that, we definitely will lose negotiating power a lot, I think.
I mean, what I mean is well before starting the negotiation.
Well, if they know that the community says we want to go to, let's say here.
As I said, if there are a sufficient amount of options, why not ask for community feedback?
Because a lot of there's things that, the information we get from hotels, like the financial side of it is very important. That's not material we can disclose.
No. I'm not asking any NDA-like things.
Let me ask you the question. So what would you have us disclose?
I mean, for example, for IETF 95, I think, location area is Europe. And if you guys identify 3 cities as options, it would be useful for the community to discuss or give feedback on these location options.
So, sorry? Well, we have done that in some cases, but, it's not that the thing is, I don't think a city is enough. I mean, let me cite an example, and it's sort of mentioned in another slide. We were looking at a venue in Berlin. So, it is in Berlin, but when we did the site visit, there were not restaurants close by. The venue coming up, which is announced, is like right in the middle of the city, and there's lots of places. So I think we would have to disclose down to the hotel level for it to be very interesting or useful. And I don't think we can do that and still be able to negotiate a good contract. Yeah, I mean, because in cities there's good venues and bad venues. It's not just the.
So I'll use Dallas again as a foil. Dallas is a pretty big city. It takes about 90 minutes, if you're lucky, to drive around it in a circle. On a freeway at 70 miles an hour. We had at least 3, if not more, venues for that meeting in 2005 that we were considering. I don't believe that the community, on the basis of feedback, would be able to say, yes, Dallas is a great city because it's imminently walkable, and these venues are close to downtown. In fact, from the one that we picked that the two reception areas in the hotel are a quarter of a mile apart. So the building itself was quite large. So I'm not sure that city information is that useful. It certainly sends a signal to the people who are bidding on the IETF's business that we're committed to that location. So I think that's a bad thing to open up a negotiating position with. That said, if you have a multi-year contract with a hotel provider, and you're saying, should we go back to Minneapolis again, where we know the venue is known, and we had at the time a contract with that provider, that's different because we've already determined the price associated with that, and it's a question of dates and flexibility and so forth.
Yeah, and let me say a little more about that. So if people have ideas for where we should meet, please tell us. We try to listen and can look at it. We also have, especially for venues we've met in already, we've had pretty good success with, repeating in certain locations. There's a lot less unknown about it, and we've gotten, like the past and the next meeting in Vancouver, we think we got very good rates. So, if you have feedback, especially on, you'd like to meet again in, well, I'll use Minneapolis as an example because that seems to come up from time to time. But if you have particular, you like something, or, well, usually we know when you didn't, but if you'd like to go back to a place that you thought worked out pretty well, then that would be very good feedback because we sort of have relationships with those properties or chains and can likely get better rates if we, have more, if we give them more business. I mean, you get a better deal the more money you spend, if that makes sense. And that doesn't have to be just for a single meeting.
Hi, just one curious question. So you keep talking about losing the negotiation power. So in terms of the finance, how much money that we lost if we don't lose the negotiation power? How much price being jacked up?
There's no way I could possibly. I don't know. I can tell you that, seeing hotel rates that are under $200 is a lot better than more than $200, but I can't.
But what about how much IAOC signed for the venues? Let's forget about the hotel rates.
Yeah, it's very hard to quantify in general. I mean, we have obviously specific numbers for venues under contract, but okay. Well, this has been more fun than the previous slides. So let's see. So now we're talking about the criteria we use to select venues. So, the way I think about this, the first and most important thing is that we can have a successful meeting. If there's not enough rooms for working groups, if there's not enough room for plenary, all the things we do at the, it's nice to have wide halls. If that doesn't work, then none of the rest really matters. So that's I think the highest priority here. We need to be able to have a network. Obviously there needs to be, we like to eat. There can be issues of meeting space cost and room cost. Those are, I think, the most basic things. And if that doesn't work, then it doesn't get considered very much. And so, but having a successful meeting where there are enough rooms, and we're, as I've come to learn, we're actually different than a lot of other organizations in that we have many parallel meeting rooms, but then we also need a room for plenaries where everyone shows up. And not all venues do that, and that sort of limits our choice in where we can meet. That's something I didn't know before I got involved in this, but it actually sort of, in some sense I'm surprised, when we ask AMS for, okay, how about these cities, it's like you don't get like 10 venues in all of these places, because a lot of hotels or things that have meeting space don't have both. It's like one or the other. So it's not quite as our requirements in some sense are a little more unique than other groups. I'd say, and these are all important. I'm not sure these are priority. The highest priority again is whether we can have a successful meeting. We like to have cities or areas where There's overflow hotels nearby to give people choices in where they stay. Especially if you can find hotels at lower costs. You may not want to stay in the meeting hotel, but you might want to stay down the road. It's nice if you can walk. We clearly like to make it easy to find places to go eat or drink, not have to always have a car or take the train if you can. We like the area to be reasonably safe. This is something I think we find is sometimes fairly challenging to evaluate. I think in the past have been using the U.S. State Department travel reports, and I think I've come to believe that sort of tells you it's safe to have meetings in the U.S. and everywhere else in the world you should be scared. And it's not really like that. So, and especially if you look up the crime statistics for Atlanta, there's clearly areas you don't want to go. So it's not at all that clear, and we're working with AMS to sort of find out better sources of information. And there may not be a lot better sources of information, but we at least understand that you have to filter what you read there a lot. And there's in a particular country or city, there's places that you can go fine, and then there's places you can't. But when you go meet with a hotel and they tell you you really shouldn't walk outside at all, we listen to that, which we have heard. We also want there to be, possible for most attendees to get visas. I'm trying to say careful here. I think good is the right word. I don't think you could find venues where every possible person who wanted to come was, guaranteed to have a visa. I think that we wouldn't have meetings anywhere. But we certainly don't want to have blocks of large groups of attendees to not be able to make it based on visas, or visas not even being available. And then travel. We like hub airports if we can. Lots of with reasonable connections. Not excessive cost. And then we try to do it in a way that not everyone is always having a long and expensive trip. So just to go back, so this is sort of the process. It's not an algorithm. There's a lot of the data is not always exactly the same. So there's an element of people reviewing the data and making what seems to be a reasonable decision. And I think this, the reason this next slide is here is that I believe that this is the rest of the meetings for the through the end of 2015, and I think all of these venues meet the requirements on the previous page. I think Orlando actually happened before this, and before we started doing this, and I think we might have a different outcome if it happened later. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Oh, well, then I'll go first while you're walking back here. So if you go back one, you made it sound to me like travel costs and available places to eat outside were secondary to venue will support successful IETF meeting.
Yeah, I don't think this is not a priority list, except for the successful meeting. They're all factors. We try to find places that meet all of them. There's going to be various.
But clearly,
degrees.
Travel cost for one. If it's too high, it won't be a successful meeting. Full stop.
I agree. Right. Or if the hotel rooms are too high. Right.
Or if the hotel rooms are too high, or if the travel pain is too high, or if the restaurants are not available and therefore people can't get back in a reasonable time or whatever.
Completely agree. Or if people view it to be unsafe to go there.
You started to sound like you were going down the path of these aren't essential to the successful meeting, and
no, that was not my intent. And you'll see I have a slide later which talks about some specific reasons why we rejected certain venues, and you'll see some of those things there.
Hello, Philip Eardley. I just
Hello?
wanted you to talk a bit more about Hawaii.
Sorry, a little louder.
Could you talk a bit more about the Hawaii venue? Because Hawaii strikes me as being fairly inaccessible from a travel point of view. Doesn't it take a very long time for everybody to get there, which in some sense is fair?
Yes, I will, but let's save that for the next slide. I will, because it's on the list.
Thank you.
Joel.
Well, you were on the next slide.
You're right, but I went back.
The next slide from this was actually the one I was going to comment on, and not on the specific venues, but hosts that provide. I mean, there's a diversity of what constitutes useful input from a host, right? In some cases, the host is merely providing money. I would imagine in the case of that 2015 host, they're probably doing the network too, since they've done it twice before.
Yes.
Right? So there's a great deal of variation. The host in Berlin is actually providing the network connectivity, or one of the hosts in Berlin, for that meeting. So there's a great deal of variation in what hosts do. Some hosts contribute money and sponsorship and have a nice public face, but some of them want other things out of the meeting, and that does actually impact location choice, or I should say, it impacts the host that you get in some locations in some fashion. And I think there's been a sort of big debate in the IETF on whether or not that matters, in the sense that I can say, having volunteered on the network team, it's sometimes really helpful that the host provides pieces of infrastructure that makes things in locations that otherwise might be very hard, like Vienna, because if you've worked in a UN-operated convention center, that's not an easy place to work. But Telekom Austria, for example, was able to make that work. So some venues that actually don't work for the IETF without a host work because they have a host.
Right, and I think there's also other variations on that where there can be local conditions that you could only have a successful meeting with a local host who can deal with the government or the whatever the issue is. It's not, it's not as common, but I think that's certainly the case in some places. Go ahead.
Thank you. What I was not saying on your previous slide was that basically that set of conditions evaluates differently depending on whether you're trying to just make your life as easy for yourself as possible, so you always stay in the meeting hotel, you come to the airport, you get in a taxi or the van shuttle or whatever and go to the meeting venue. And if you're trying to do the meeting on a total budget where you actually are looking for the very cheapest local transportation options, you're not going to stay in the meeting hotel because it's too expensive and so on. You end up with a very different answer as to what's acceptable or not. So, for example, and I hate to belabor the point because I know you can't do anything about it, if you were trying to do that here, you can get 2.5 miles away by local transport. Then you either got to walk or take a $15 taxi ride or whatever. So it evaluates very differently from that perspective to what you would do if you just got in the van shuttle at the airport and come here. Thank you.
Yes, I don't disagree. We do try now to find places where there are alternate hotels within reasonable distances. It obviously varies.
Yeah, all I'm saying is you've got to take, I think, both perspectives when you're actually evaluating the venues. Does it meet the criteria that group of people who do it this way, or does it meet the criteria of this other group of people who are very cost limited and do it that way?
Yes, and we do try to do that.
Yeah, not to belabor the point. There are something like 200,000 hotel units within 10 square miles of this location. So there's actually plenty of hotel here. It's actually getting there that's the problem. But I mean, I don't see this meeting as being a subject of much debate because, as far as I know, this was being discussed before the IAOC even existed. Certainly, the original IAOC chair indicates that we're having discussion about the IEEE meeting in 2007, which means we're talking about a decision that was made 6 or 7 years ago now.
As I've at least wanted to say to some emails, or maybe I did actually, You know, if we had a time machine, we could fix a lot of these problems. But we can't go back. I understand. And
as an experiment, this one sucks because the people who created it aren't really part of the organization, except maybe for the IID, who's been here almost that long, and the guy who's getting off the ISG chair position. Those are the only people in the organization that have been here as long as this, in the decision-making role as long as this venue has been selected.
Right.
So this meeting venue is a really bad place to have experiments if the time it takes to carry those out is measured in decades.
Right. And so it's in two things. We certainly get that we should have lower cost alternate hotels within reasonable distances. We do consider that. It's always on the things we look at. And the other thing, just if you go back in the history, you will see other venues like this that were isolated and stuff. And, the criteria has changed from a longer, well, the group is not even bigger, but so the criteria has really changed, and it was not looked at before. So, Hawaii, next topic. So, there's actually a fair amount of history about how we ended up in Hawaii again. Some of you, or at least I was at the first Hawaiian meetings. I think I have a T-shirt in my drawer that doesn't fit anymore, but I do have it. And so there was some desire in the IETF to have another meeting there. We went through the process of actually discussing it, and then there was a long period of time where the ISG specifically said we don't want to meet in Hawaii, so we didn't. But the thinking changed. We brought that, consideration to the ISG, and they said it would be fine. In fact, everyone on the ISG at the time from all regions were very supportive of going to Hawaii. So we went, and I'll honestly say I wanted to go back to Hawaii. But it's not just because of me wanting to do that. So it was based on that feedback that we investigated venues in Hawaii and ended up in Honolulu in November of next year. Did that answer your question?
Perhaps I'm wrong, isn't it? Isn't the travel time, if you kind of averaged for the IETF attendees, the travel time?
Well,
to
it
these
depends
venues,
where you're
would it
coming
be a lot
from,
worse
clearly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Averaging across the attendees, would it be similar or same as the others, or much more?
Well, so if you're coming from Asia, it's fairly convenient. If you're coming from the U.S. West Coast, it's not so bad. It's longer from the East Coast, and it's a much longer trip from Europe. So it's like, we're going to Berlin next time, and that gets changed around. So it's, I think it's one of these, for some people it's better, and for some people it's worse. But that's true of a lot of these meetings.
But Berlin must be within 10 hours of Asia and of the West Coast, mustn't it?
No, it's a 5-hour trip to Hawaii from San Francisco. It's like
Berlin is. And Hawaii's
Berlin.
20 hours, I think, from Europe, isn't it? So...
something like that, yeah. But it's about, for me, I live on the West Coast, and going to Berlin is...
10 hours?
No, it's more. So I'll move on. And these are the meetings in 2016, and on the online meeting calendar, you can see the dates further out into the future. Boy, 2022, that's a long time from now. So, do you want to go ahead? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to, was debating whether to even mention it or not, but your point, and I think Joel made the point too about how, it's a little bit of a problem when the decision, looking at venue selections as an experiment and then saying, well, gee, but that decision has always been made years ago with criteria that have changed since, so it's not really fair, is very valid, obviously. But I think, and much as I hate to do this, but I think John Clenson mentioned on the mailing list that we keep running into the situation where we go to these venues, people complain a lot, and the answer is always, oh, well, that was made a few years back. But, we went to Orlando before, a venue that I think maybe had fewer problems than this one, but, it's hard to remember, as a few years ago. But the same kind of issues, isolated, nothing around, couldn't walk to it. Dublin, more recently. So I think we still, I'm not really sure exactly what I'm trying to get at, other than we seem to keep repeating problems, and then there's this big flurry on the mailing list, and the answer is always, yeah, we understand, but the bad choices were always made under an old set of criteria until they happen again. And maybe the problem is just that we forget which venues were particularly unpleasant and why, such as being isolated.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. I mean, other than a way I have already. I guess I'm asking to judge us on what's, the venues we've booked out into the future, as opposed to, I can't do anything about the past, but I don't think we're going to have these problems in the future.
Okay, I think that's very fair. It's just that we keep hearing, that after previous problems.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, the pipeline is pretty long, right? So it takes a while to work through the issues that are either old or unfortunate. We were, long after the IAOC was created, we were still going to meetings that had been booked by Alveza, right? And not that I have any fault with Vortex Seminars per se, but that was a completely different organization that made those contracts. So I think, personally, I think all venues are a compromise. And having worked on the network and been responsible for it, I have definitely ended up building networks in venues that I didn't want to use because they were compromises that were not made in my favor. And that, of course, is reality. You build networks where the people are, not where you want to build them. But, I think there will always be some compromises that result in discomfort for somebody. And to the extent that we can minimize the discomfort for everyone, I think we win. At least that's my sense of it.
I want to add two things, actually. The first is that finding a suitable venue for a group this size with the requirements we have with our fixed dates is very difficult to begin with. It isn't like you get 20 answers from anywhere when you put it out to bid. The other part is that I think it's important to remind ourselves that the three regions we're talking about are not the same size, right? I don't really care if a meeting is in Paris, Oslo, Rome, or Prague, because I have to fly to some hub in Europe, usually it's Frankfurt in my case, and then go from there. And the additional travel time, it's a couple of hours. It doesn't really matter, okay? Say we were to go to Singapore, which is in Asia. It takes 23 hours and 40 minutes to fly there from Washington, D.C. via Tokyo. Okay. Once you get to Tokyo, which is 10 hours from where I live in San Francisco, it's another 7 hours down to Singapore. That's really a lot of travel time to do in one day. And maybe we need to redefine our sense of we just remind ourselves of the size of these regions when we make these kinds of decisions. So in terms of travel time to Hawaii, yeah, it really depends on where you start.
I will continue. So this slide is, you only see the ones we select. It would sort of be nice. I wish I could share you with the ones we rejected. But so these are some reasons why venues that would have otherwise been good, we didn't select, and they come right out of the criteria that, we evaluated one location. Actually, we're just looking at it again. It's gotten a little cheaper, but the room rates were just way too high. The meeting space was nice. It was a nice location, but the minimum cost for rooms was over $300, and I'm pretty sure I know what the reaction would be. We rejected a venue based on general safety concerns in the city. We've rejected other venues that did not have nearby restaurants and alternate hotels nearby, or you'd have to get on the train to get to them. We've rejected a venue because one group of IETF attendees there wasn't a process to get a visa. We've also rejected because of the travel costs for all attendees would be very high. So, a lot of times it's like more general reasons, but there's some venues that in other ways would be very good that we rejected because it didn't meet this criteria. So, I pulled together, I got the data from the Secretariat, and I got to learn a lot more about Excel. So this is the breakdown of IETF attendees by region, and I hope you can read this because I can't quite read it on my slide. But you can see that the majority of attendees are North America, Asia, and Europe. And so that's the big block, and this is from IETF 85 back to 79. So this is the balance. It obviously changes depending where the meeting location is, but, it's, I was actually surprised that, so we'll see this vary, and I think it will probably stay like this. But then I break, if you see it on the top, there's the regions that are not as many people come. So I have another slide which just shows those. And what, it was basically, in this discussion about meeting in another region, I wanted to see what the data was about how many people were coming to the IETF meeting. I mean, it doesn't look at mailing list participation, but these were people who actually were here and, registered. And so you can see that, South America, Latin America, and Caribbean is growing. It's 16 people at the last meeting. I don't know what the numbers are for here. And so, I think this is good data for looking at where, if we do decide to meet in another region, it's part of the justification because there is participation. And so we have started looking at venues in Latin and South America. We had one serious offer to host a meeting there. We did a site visit last month to Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo. And so I think if the IETF is convinced we can have a successful meeting there, then we will request feedback from the community on this, because this is, not the normal rotation. It is a longer trip for most people. It does vary a bit. And so I think it would be good to have feedback. I think there's reason why the IETF community should consider this, because we are seeing participation. The internet is growing a lot in this region. But, it's if we want to see what the community's response to this is. And then I think this is my last slide. So some people have asked why we've had 3 consecutive meetings in North America. IETF 86, 85, and 84. So, as we've just talked about, Orlando was scheduled a while ago to be adjacent with IEEE. There was discussions much earlier about doing that. I think it's one of those things. At the time this was made, it made perfect sense. IEEE had meetings here before and liked it, but I can't change the history. Atlanta is more interesting, or that Atlanta was supposed to be earlier, and the IETF chair actively requested that we move the Atlanta meeting to later, because we've met our obligation. We had a contract with Hilton Hotels, and we had to have so many meetings in so many venues, and we had a contract already for a meeting in Atlanta. And under that contract, we could move it, but we still had to have a meeting there. And so the IETF chair requested we move it to later in order to resolve, because at that time, Chinese IETF attendees were having a hard time getting visas into the U.S., and this meant they would not be qualified to be on the NomCon, because it was hard for them to, I guess you have to go to 2 out of 3 meetings, and so if they couldn't get into the country to go to the meeting, then they couldn't be on the NomCon, and that didn't seem fair, which I would agree with. And so we moved meetings around and scheduled that to be a meeting not in the U.S. And so based on the contract, Atlanta was as late as we could push it out, but still have a meeting in that hotel. Turned out it worked very well, but we ended up with this series of North American meetings. And then Vancouver, as we announced at the time we announced it, was selected because we couldn't find a venue that could accommodate us in Asia and was affordable. And, you saw those numbers on the earlier slide. And so it just, I think we do find it more challenging to find venues in Asia than we do in the other regions. The cities like Hong Kong tend to book up very early. I'm not sure of all of the reasons, but I think it definitely has been more challenging than the other regions. And, we ran up into here. We wanted to, complete our 3-year plan and have a venue, and we found Vancouver was available. We actually got very good rates there, and it wasn't quite the plan, but it's sort of as close to Asia as you can get and be in North America. So it was a compromise, but it was largely because we were very confident that if we booked the hotel that had very high rates, there's been a lot of unhappiness on the mailing list. So it was a trade-off. So this is how we got to have 3 meetings in North America. You can look at the future committed meetings, and you'll see that this will get back to the regular rotation. And so questions and feedback. And particularly would like to know if you thought this was useful, if you'd like to see it again, if there's other material we should cover, or anything else. And officially we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, I think it's useful. Thank you.
Good.
I appreciate it.
I agree that it's useful. I'd like to see it again, and I think you just shortened operational plenary by about half an hour.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was sort of clear. I think my experience from the last meeting is we were compressing it so much that it was confusing. And I'd rather do this on Sunday and provide more information.
I'm really impressed that at this point Murray is still that kind of optimist.
And with that, I think we're done. Thank you.